This is my second video on Jean-Jacques Rousseau, covering arguably his most influential and important work, The Social Contract. But before I begin with that, I thought I should just go back again to the previous discourse, the discourse on inequality, in the notes there, because as I set up before, Rousseau thought that the state of nature was something preferable to the state of modern man, and it meant many different critiques of society as of the society of his day. And so you ask yourself, well, what do we do with that? Are you saying that we should just go back to how things were before? Is that even possible? He has already said that, well, not really, no, it's not possible. So what are we to do then? And in one of the notes, he answered this question. He answered this question at more length, and it's a great illustration of, I think, his writing style and his, I guess a bit of his personality is comes through as well. What I conceive to be his sort of slipperiness. How he is a bit unclear with what he says, and it's very wordy. So, what then? Must we destroy societies, annihilate thine and mine, and return to live in the forest with bears? A conclusion in the manner of my adversaries, which I might much rather prefer to anticipate than to leave them the shame of drawing it. O you, to whom the celestial voice has not yet made itself heard, and who recognize no other destiny for your species than to end this short life in peace. You who are able to leave behind in the midst of your cities your fatal acquisitions, your anxious minds, your corrupted hearts, and your unbridled desires. Reclaim, since it is within your power to do so, your ancient and first innocence. Go into the woods and to lose sight and memory of the crimes of your contemporaries, and do not fear that you are debasing your species by renouncing its enlightenment in order to renounce its vices. As for men like me, whose passions have forever destroyed their original simplicity, who can no longer feed on the grass and the acorns, nor do without the laws and leaders, those who were honored in their first father with supernatural lessons, those who may see in the intention of giving human actions from the outset a morality they would not have acquired for a long time, the reason for a precept indifferent in itself and inexplicable in any other system. Those, in a word, who are convinced that the divine voice called the entire human species to the enlightenment and the happiness of the celestial intelligences. They will all endeavor, by practicing the virtues they oblige themselves to perform as they learn them, to deserve the eternal reward they must expect from doing so. They will respect the sacred bonds of the societies of which they are members. They will love their fellow humans and serve them with all their power. They will scrupulously obey the laws and men who are their authors and ministers. They will honor above all the good and the wise princes, who know how to prevent, cure, and palliate that throng of abuses and evils that are always ready to crush us. They will animate the zeal of those worthy leaders by showing them, without fear and without flattery, the greatness of their task and the rigor of their duty. But for all this, they will have no less scorn for a constitution that can be maintained only with the assistance of so many respectable people, which is desired more often than obtained, and from which, in spite of all their efforts, more real calamities than apparent advantages always arise. So he starts off mockingly telling us that, well, for those of you who can, well, yeah, you should return to the woods. But it sounds. Maybe he's realizes that these types of men don't actually exist. So it's pure mockery. And then goes to say that, well, we can actually commit ourselves to our societies and make them good, and it's possible to have a good society, but it's very unlikely, he says, that it would depend on exceptional people, which are rare, and even if we have them, they will most likely fail. So it sets up a very skeptical view of the future. But the social contract, this is where he really gets into politics, or becomes a political thinker, and he tries to, in this long document, make a sort of guide for what a legitimate state would be like, or how it can be constructed, on what principles it can be built. He says that the question he wants to answer is if there can be any legitimate form of government, and so what makes a contract of some sort, what makes it legitimate. And in short, any contract that violates human freedom is illegitimate. He starts off with humans having this natural freedom in the state of nature where we can do whatever we want. And he would like us to keep that freedom, I think, as much as we can. That fundamentally we have the right to decide for ourselves what we want to do with ourselves. And that is an unalienable human right. And so, for example, he doesn't see that any contract that would destroy the freedom of one party could be legitimate. For example, he talks about a people giving themselves to a king, which he would always characterize as a despot. And so in that contract, he says that one party has absolute power while the other party has absolute obedience. And there is no way for the other party to make itself heard or the other party would sort of just cancel it, or well, if one party has absolute power over all the others, and they must obey the other one at whatever he commands, then effectively they have lost all their freedom, and therefore this contract would be illegitimate. But so, since humans can't go back to nature, we are still dependent on another, or dependent on some society to survive. So this dependence on each other and this human freedom, how can we reconcile these? And this is done, according to Rousseau, by the construction of what he calls the general will, which is the will of all, the will of everyone in that contract or in that group. It is something that where everyone can voice their opinions on what everyone, on the laws that should apply to everyone. And so they are each participating in this, and so they can voice their opinions, and they can keep a part of their freedom that way, and then this applies to everyone equally. And it is a bit tricky to figure out exactly what this general will is when you start reading about it. So I figured I would read a few sections where he talks about this general will. Let's see here. For example, that there's often a considerable difference between the will of all and the general will. The latter consists only of the common interest, while the former consists of the opinions of private interest and is merely a sum of particular wills. But take away from these same wills the pluses and minuses, which mutually cancel each other out, and the remaining sum of the differences is the general will. So we'd have wills cancelling each other out, and what was left is this general will. But what does that really mean? I read that apparently Hegel had misinterpreted it, Rousseau, and that it said that the general will was only what everyone could agree on. And at first, that made me think of this short bit here, that whenever there is some sort of conflict, it just sort of neutralizes each other and nothing happens, but only where everyone can agree does the will do anything. But this is not really the case. This is not really, but this doesn't seem to be correct. On another part here, because Rousseau says that the general will is it's not only that it's fair to everyone, but it is always right. It is always what the people want. But even though what it wants is right, it can still be misguided, he says. And that is a very confusing thing. That it's always right, but it doesn't always know what it itself wants. So here's another enlightening section. By itself, the people always wants the good, but by itself it does not always see it. The general will is always right, but the judgment that guides it is not always enlightened. It must be made to see objects as they are, sometimes as they appear to be shown the good path it seeks, be safeguarded against seduction by particular wills, be brought to regard considerations of time and place, to weigh the appeal of present and perceptible advantages against the dangers of remote and hidden evils. Private individuals see the good they reject. The public wants the good it does not see. All are equally in the need of guides. The first must be obliged to make their own wills conform to their reason. The latter must be taught how to know what it wants. The union of understanding and will in the social body results from public enlightenment. From this union results the smooth workings of the parts, and finally, the greatest force of the whole. From this arises the need for a lawgiver. And this is where the social contract's second part starts off. Oh wait, no, not. Yeah, exactly. That the will, that beside this general will, the will of the people, it also needs this lawgiver. And in the chapter after this text, he goes on to tell us who this lawgiver is and what does he do. It seems that the lawgiver is like the founder of the society, because if the group of people would not naturally sort of come together and form this type of government, and they wouldn't know sort of how to see the general will and understand what it is, and to know that it's a good thing. Like it says, the general will is separate, it's a different thing from the will of all, that each and everyone has this particular will that wants something that is perhaps good for them only, but of course not necessarily good for everyone. And so they would have to be convinced to be part of this general will. And who can claim, sort of, on what authority can we sort of bring this society together? Where does this first authority before the general will is constructed, which then becomes the source of authority? And the lawgiver, Rousseau says, would be an extraordinary person. But more importantly, it is a religious person. The authority that he can claim that is needed to generate, to have as basis for why should people listen to this lawgiver in the first place, without before this society has been formed. It is because the lawgiver can claim that he speaks for the gods. And so you would think that in the Rousseau's government you would always have there would always be religion. Religion would always be a part of government, and later on that theme emerges, or it comes back, big time. And one more thing that he thinks is necessary for this society or for this general will to work as he intends it, is that you very quickly realize that, when they say that we can only make laws on that should apply to all, and why this would work for Rousseau is that, if I vote for a law that also affects me, then the laws would have to be good. They would have to be non-intrusive. They have to be fair, and I wouldn't and not burdensome, because that's not something that people would bring onto themselves. But of course, laws have different effects on different people, because people are in different. People have different lives. They have different circumstances. And to Rousseau, he says that there can't be sort of big difference between the people in society, and there can be no factions, because then the people in that faction would vote not according to what is best for everyone, but what is best for that small group. And that whole point already seems incredibly naive, that there could be a society that did not have any sort of factions. Not at least in a modern society with a big population. So that's a very big problem for this theory, that the general will would always be the best for everyone. Well, only if the people are very similar to each other. And like I said, just mentioning that the lawgiver sort of teaches the people that it teaches them what they want. It teaches them that this general will is their will as well, and that is what they truly want. And he establishes, and I would think Rousseau would think the lawgiver is a he. And he establishes the government, and even though we start with the will of all as the basis for legitimate political power. You would think that, well, Rousseau is always, what Rousseau is advocating for is a democracy. But actually he says that, well, I guess it immediately start off as a type of democracy, but then the people can decide to have any type of government that they want, and the people would realize that it's not efficient to always have a direct democracy, say, and so they could have a democracy, an aristocracy, or a monarchy. These are the three basic types of governments. And then he gives his recommendations for, well, what should that these three types are best suited to different conditions. And it's basically that the larger the population, the bigger the government must necessarily be. And there's always, except for a perfect democracy, which Rousseau says will have never existed and never will, actually. But he says that there will be a government in his social contract, because the power to make laws would have to be pushed onto a minority to carry out the general will. And those people who are part of government, Rousseau refers to as magistrates. And so in an aristocracy you would have a small group of people. There are the magistrates that execute the general will. And to Rousseau, this is the ideal type of government. He thinks this, at least the elective aristocracy, because it sort of balances the two factors of in a democracy where everyone's voice needs to be heard, then it becomes difficult to execute the general will because there is so much, because everyone needs to participate in the process, which makes the process slower. But in a monarchy where one person is charged with executing the general will, then that person is, well, it's one will, and in theory it becomes much quicker, because he can just give the order and that's how things will go down. But of course, since it's going to, in a monarchy, the will of the monarch will have an effect on the types of laws that he puts into place, and so the general will be weakened by this factor, and therefore an aristocracy is sort of the best of two worlds, or the least worst. And then it gives some sort of considerations that the types of governments are best suited to not only to the size of the people, but to the resources of the land. Because Rousseau thinks that each government or each state should be as independent as possible from other states. That way it can, well, like I mentioned in the previous video, that he cherishes independence. And I guess that if the country is independent from other countries, then there is no need to go to war, or and they would be self-sufficient. So that would be a good thing. And so they would have the state should not grow further than it has resources to grow, than it has food to feed itself. And one very interesting thing is, if the country is very rich, if it has a lot of resources, then it's actually better suited to be a monarchy, because all the riches should then be centered or moved to the I guess the royal family, to sort of the to the king. You would think, well, wait, why exactly? Why would we need to do that? Well, because like he says in his previous discourses, he believes that wealth corrupts people, and so it is better to have all the wealth sort of centered with a small elite that is, well, perhaps corrupted by it, but at least the people would be uncorrupt. So that's an interesting idea. And here again, his negativity or his skepticism comes back, and he says that no government is meant to last. And that depending on what type of resources you have and what type of people, actually, it's not only resources, but the sort of mentality of the people included should affect the type of government or how the state is run. But no matter what type of system you set in place, it will always it will not last forever, he says. And the natural tendency of governments will be to shrink. So if you have a democracy, you would over time turn to an aristocracy, which would over time turn to a monarchy, but never the other way around. So in the end, the state is doomed to fail. But I guess then it is destroyed, and perhaps new states emerge someplace else. And this covers his third part in the social contract. And next, in his fourth and final part, he has a number of different topics which are sort of a bit all over the place. It seems like he wrote that. I would have guessed that he wrote it long after the three first parts, because they have more distinct themes, and the fourth one was just some spread out notes that he wanted to include in here. And one of them is that he believes that it's very bad for the government to have a lot of debate and discussion, because, well, it would make it would destabilize the government, and so that would eventually risk ruining the state. So he's not really a fan of a lively debate climate, or what you would call it. And in one chapter he says that if the state is under an immediate large threat that needs to be dealt with quickly, then it is okay for a dictator to take charge of it, to take over everything. I don't think he mentions if this would be different in a monarchy, or if this is one and the same person in that case. But it's interesting to read for the first time, reading someone who not advocating for dictatorship obviously, but who says that, well, it would be fine in desperate times for someone to step in and take over things. Now, the very last chapter, I think I'll only have time to Yeah. I think I only have time to just go into the very last chapter of Book 4, where he goes back to religion. And I honestly can't really place his general view on religion, because it's very confusing. See, in the last chapter, he it seems that he definitely says that the separation of church and state was a mistake, and so ideally in his state, they should have been united from the beginning. But he also says that in chapter of the lawgiver, that, well, because the lawgiver comes with sort of with the political laws, and it makes a point that these are not political, or the lawgiver comes with sort of religious laws. I would say his first laws are considered religious laws, but then after that, those laws are made to establish a political system, which then generates political laws, and he makes a separation between those two. But then when it comes to the end of the book 4, it's like he wants to reverse that and bring everything into a political system or a religious system. But having said that, he's also very critical towards Christianity in this chapter, writing some very strong objections to, or some very strong negative opinions about Christians, saying that Christians are made to be slaves, for example, and he criticizes the shift from the shift in focus towards a heavenly kingdom, which has sort of destroyed the political body, or distorted it, because now some people are working towards what is good for the state, and some people are working towards what is good for the kingdom of heaven, and so you have these forces that want fundamentally different things. And he says that a good religion is a religion that worships the fatherland, but that this type of religion would also make the people very bloodthirsty and violent toward other states. And then an even better religion would be one that says that to worship God is to worship the state, which sounds very authoritarian, where it gives off very strong authoritarian vibes, you could say. But that the best religion is one that is universal yet personal, that everyone has a personal relationship with God, but that this would also mean the end of the basis for social unity, because each one has his own personal connection with God. Then there is not enough connection between other people, and so then you think that a religion is, or the best religion is opposed to the state, which the best religion would return us to the state of nature, I think he wants to say. So he's pro-religion but against Christianity, which in his times, which is why he was exiled from, or his citizenship in Geneva was withdrawn, and he had to flee from the country. And that's all I have to say for now on Rousseau. I don't think I will return to him in the future. Like I mentioned in the first video, this was my first dive into Rousseau and political philosophy. And honestly, it's not... Well, it's very relevant, or the ideas are... The practical implications of the ideas, of course, have big impacts on... have a big impact on society. But I don't find them very interesting, honestly. And as you may tell, as you probably tell, I feel I disagree or I'm confused by continuously by Rousseau. So I'm not really curious on what he has to say on much else. But to say something positive is that, well, he did absolutely contribute towards the idea that, well, we should, well, towards, for democracy, because he says that we should all have to, unless we all have a voice in something, in some, in a contract, then there, if we don't have anything to say, then we should not have to obey it. And with that, I'm ending this video. Bye.